Hello, Arielle. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Really good. Did I do your name right?
Yes, Arielle.
Good. I like to start 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 at least with that bit, right?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we are having this conversation today because I saw a post of yours. It was actually a couple of months ago, it was before Christmas. And it really, for me, was like, what a brilliant thing to name. And the way you unpacked it all for me was just like, this is a conversation that really feels necessary. And I would love to unpack this further on my shows. This is why we're here. And your post was all around high sensation experiences, like in service of spiritual growth. And what I really appreciated about your post was the kind of level of like nuance you're bringing to it, like that weren't making it wrong, you weren't making it right, you were just very much in this kind of, this is the whole deal. And so because of our audience and because they're often exploring things of this nature, I feel like this is going to be really of service. So I'm really looking forward to this. Let's start with you defining, what do you mean when you are just talking about these high sensation experiences?
Yeah. I would describe high sensation experiences as any type of experience that stretches us um, widely outside of our comfort zone, and likely also expands our nervous system outside of the range of like comfort, everyday waking reality, um,
Mm,
which can be beautiful because often it's these expanses experiences that stretch us outside of what we feel is familiar, outside of who we perceive ourselves to be in terms of our identity, because these are things that can and often do catalyze change in our
mm.
lives, in our identities, how we perceive reality. So yeah.
Oh, really, really beautifully defined. I love that when I ask a question of that nature and someone can define it so beautifully like that. So huge appreciation for that. Would you give some examples of the kinds of high sensation experiences that perhaps you've had or you've seen that others have?
Yeah, well, I would say that there's the high sensation experiences that we intend for and plan for. Um, and then there's the ones that just kind of happen. So
Yes.
maybe I'll focus on kind of like the ones we intentionally choose.
Mhm.
So high sensation experiences might be choosing that um like going to Peru and sitting in, a week long like ayahuasca ceremony with a native shaman. It might also be going to, some type of deep dive workshop or retreat focused on really expanding our relationship to our own sexuality and our boundaries around what we think is appropriate or not appropriate, what we feel safe or not safe with. Another example could be uh, investing into a significantly high cost coaching or mentorship container that's meant to stretch your nervous system out of what is comfortable for you and what you do think is possible in terms of finance. And really just choosing to put ourselves in any type of experience where this is not my normal waking reality. I'm being asked to do, be, or feel something widely outside of what I'm used to. Um, and it's meant to create discomfort.
Oh, brilliant examples. The coaching one in particular really caught my attention because I think sometimes that that being a high sensation experience isn't always named, isn't always conscious. As in the work might be described that way, but the financial investment being outside of what's normal isn't always named in that clear way. Like that's part of what makes it what it is.
Yeah.
um something that was just occurring to me as you were giving that as an example, though, is that with the other two examples, they're fairly short-term experiences, typically, where typically the example you gave of a coaching container probably is going to be longer. And so I'd love to know if you see there's anything there worth illuminating in terms of the difference or not between like short term versus longer term.
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's nuance to it. They're not always longer containers. I've definitely been in high investment 10-day, financially oriented coaching containers that definitely stretch me. What is beautiful about having a longer term experience, especially if it is stretching you outside of your comfort zone, is that it gives your nervous system more time to calibrate and adapt and attune to the experience.
Mm,
When it's a shorter experience, not only are we just dealing with the fact that there's kind of less time for our nervous system to acclimate, it's kind of like when you're out of a stream and then you decide you're going to get into a stream that's like very, very cold, it's like it can take
mm,
time for the system to acclimate to it. But the other challenge sometimes, which can come up when we get into these high sensation transformative containers, is the feeling of like, I only have this much time. I need to make sure I get as much out of it as possible. Um,
mm,
there's this pressure we can place upon ourselves because of the short interim of time that can actually contribute to what I might call like re-traumatizing, or actually like
mm.
pulling us back on our journey, or creating what I would call the contraction after the expansion, um,
Yes.
because of how condensed the experience is. And again, it's not bad, and it's not true that that will always be the case. It's just possible.
Yes, that really makes sense. So again, what everything you've described so far has been in the main talking about I guess why we might choose into these things from a place of like this is going to be serving, this is going to expand my nervous system. Um is there anything you'd like to add to that before we start to sort of journey more into kind of like other things that are at play? In terms of it may well be even sharing some of your personal experiences, but certainly, again, I know that you're not at all demonizing high sensation experiences. I know that's not what the conversation here. And certainly for me personally, some of those kinds of experiences for myself have been, that I can still feel the ripple effects in a positive way,
Mhm.
years afterwards. Um, and so there's elements that I think possibly worth talking about that kind of perhaps help that be the case in terms of kind of what happens afterwards, the integration of those things. But certainly I know I've had experiences, just as an example, certain shamanic initiations where I don't believe I could have had that type of opening a different way. And
Yep.
it was held in a way that allowed me to do the integration. And I kind of like, it feels like, okay, and my nervous system is this size because of what happened, however long ago it was. And so I've certainly had experiences where like it absolutely was the right thing, was serving. And, I feel so grateful I had that experience. So I'd love to hear you share some of your sense of that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the phrases I would use is, kind of like the spiritually seeking intensity junkie. And
Mhm.
I have definitely been the the sensation seeking intensity junkie. And I and I will likely be drawn towards these deep dive immersive
Mm,
experiences again at my life in some point. Um, and when I reflect on some of the most important and meaningful experiences in my life, uh, sometimes they were simultaneously the ones that did stretch me way outside of my comfort zone. And I learned things about myself, about what I wouldn't do the same way, or
Mm.
how I would relate to it differently. Um, I mean, there's so many layers to it, but to me, the biggest thing is that when we're entering into any type of a container, especially if it's something that we know is going to stretch us way outside of our comfort zone, um, I really just feel the importance of such a deep need for a trust in the facilitator, not just a like, oh my God. Like, there's a difference between pedestalizing the facilitator and having a deep trust in the
Oh,
facilitator. And I would say that that's one of the main things that I've learned on the journey, is that it's okay if you're going to feel uncomfortable in the container. That's the point in some ways, but just making sure you actually feel like, beyond a mental level, I actually feel held here. Like, I actually feel
yes.
like I can fall apart here.
Yeah, I love that so much. What was just occurring to me, I don't know if you share this sense. Often with, well, almost anything we could probably name, there's often the possibility for shadow to show up within it. And then often there'll be kind of a shadow pole within that shadow, where there can be a kind of repression end and an inflation end. And as you were talking, I was like, it's interesting. I'm not just saying, I'm not projecting this is what you were saying, just to be clear. It's just what triggered the thought. In that, I think there can be either this sense of like, oh, I need to like protect my nervous system at all costs, therefore I'm going to, really limit how many of these kinds of experiences I have. Um and and I probably maybe tended that side of that shadow pole, maybe mostly, certainly in years gone by. And I think that can definitely be a place where people just make wrong the whole thing. Like, I'm not going to have those experiences. It doesn't feel safe. I'm just not going to do it. And then the other end, which is a bit like you were describing, again, I'm not naming this, was coming from shadow, but I certainly think there can be this thrill seeking. I need to throw myself at as many of these kind of experiences as possible. And for both, that it comes at a price.
Yeah, I mean, what you're speaking to is the dance of being human, and what I would call a very tantric approach to a way of being in relationship with the world as a spiritual path, where nothing's black and white. There is no cut and dry right and wrong. It's all about what is genuinely true in this moment,
Mm,
and what is the most authentic way for us to be in relationship with it, when we're not like rejecting it from a place of
mm,
repulsion, and when we're not grasping or clinging at it for fear of losing it. And it's like, the way that I'm talking, I would imagine that on some level, everyone could take what I just said and just apply it to the context of the way that we relate with like relationship,
mhm.
and and intimacy and sexuality. Um, and really just wanting to draw this parallel, and it's one of the reasons that I wrote that post, because the beautiful thing about every experience, and the beautiful thing about these deep dive containers that stretch us way outside of our comfort zone, it can show us like very clearly where all our shadow is.
Mhm.
Uh, it can show us where we've learned to give our power away, or want to be saved by something outside of us. It can show us where there's such a deep desire to be seen and chosen and validated,
Mm.
that there's a way that we leave ourselves, A lot of the work that I'm focused on in my client work and in the groups that I facilitate is looking at where we subtly or not so subtly leave the self or abandon ourself in
Mhm.
order to um, make something happen or secure some type of love or approval outside of us.
Mhm.
And I feel like these, the high sensation experiences just with being human can show these things to us. The challenge sometimes with the high sensation experiences is that the potential for re-traumatization can be heightened um, because of how far outside our comfort zone we're already stretched, which to
Mm.
me, there's nothing wrong with it, but pl- to pl- to play in these high sensation containers well, um, a deep devotion to staying like attuned and connected to our nervous system and like really listening is helpful. And the final piece that I'll add is like, there's nothing wrong with trauma. There's nothing wrong with having what we would consider a wildly bad experience um, that might not be as socially acceptable or politically correct statement. But again, some of the most important experiences that I have been the result of being stretched wildly outside of my comfort zone and allowing my boundaries to be violated because on some level I didn't want to fully honor my boundaries. Um, it's made me who I am today. So to me, it's more just bringing awareness to the shadows that might be playing out and why we choose to have certain experiences and to take deeply compassionate self-responsibility for them.
Mm. Yeah. Yes. So I just want to play back something I think you said, but let me know if what you were actually saying was different. So you were saying something like um, something along the lines of, even before we enter these experiences, these kind of system expanding experiences, sometimes we could already be in a space where our nervous system is already kind of being stretched. So we're actually entering into them from a place where we're kind of already perhaps not regulated. And what I was, as you said, do you remember saying something of that nature?
I don't know if I remember saying something like that, but what you're saying, like, yes, there is a way that is important to track, that there can be a way that we're already outside of ourselves
Mm,
before
that's
even stepping
yes.
in space.
Exactly. And so what I was pondering is going back to some of the things you're naming as to the place we've chosen in from. And I was going back to your post where you gave some examples of reasons we might choose into something, not really from what's true, but from other needs, I guess you could say. Look cool, stroke more evolved, fulfill someone else's desires, expectations, belief systems, and avoid the fear of being left behind. And so I was thinking, so if that's the place you're choosing from, that would suggest likely there's already a lack of attunement to what's going on for someone's, like in someone's body, in someone's nervous system. To choose and not recognize that's happening would suggest there's already that condition at play, which you're then going to be bringing into that high sensation experience.
Yes. So I would like to propose I don't know, perhaps for some people it sounds like a wild percentage, but to some they might be like totally, yeah. I would say probably 95% of the population is making choices from a place of disembodiment.
Yes,
And
I would agree. Yes. Yeah.
And to me, if we're making choices from a place of disembodiment, we're making places from a place of trauma.
Hmm.
Because
Yes.
my perspective to disembodiment is that for the most part, it's not to say that we consciously know that we're choosing to be disembodied, but the unconscious or subconscious choice to disembody came from an experience or a series of experiences of feeling like it's not safe for me to fully be in my body and feel
Yes.
everything that's happening. And that, and this isn't just for people who aren't doing our spiritual work. It's like, I am devoted. I mean, my life is devoted to this, and my life is devoted to looking at the subtle places where I still make choices, not even on whether or not to go to a deep dive experience, but like even just in like do I want to kiss this person? Like do I want to say yes to this experience? And it's like, am I making this choice from a place of not fully being here and having my full being, like, yeah, like every part of you actually is a
Mm.
yes to this. And like the deep to me, the deep importance of that type of embodied alignment as a spiritual practice, because of what it does to our central channel and how source can flow through us when we are truly here in every moment. Um, and that post, it's like bringing this awareness to subtlety, that
Mm.
if people are familiar with are you familiar with the boiling frog analogy?
Yes. Mhm.
Right, so it's like, you put the
Weirdly, mentioned that analogy to someone a couple of hours ago. Isn't it funny how these things just like,
yeah,
yeah, it's obviously
you
the
call
boiling frog day.
right? So it's like, for those who don't know, the frog gets placed in a pot of just like cool water, and then the flame is turned on at a very low heat so that the water heats up at such a gradual pace that the frog is boiled from the inside out and he doesn't even realize it's happening. So I parallel the boiling frog analogy to the process of the desensitization from like really the subtle nuance of our yes and no, like
Mm.
the very gentle and subtle ways over time we have learned um our deep inner guidance system to a degree that most of us don't even realize that we're doing it. And that, to me, one of the most important things all human beings can be doing, hi puppy, is learning how to come back into relationship with that subtlety. Or that's an area of the personal transformation and spiritual and relational realm that I'm kind of holding a pole for, because I see and feel the need for it.
I love that so much. It's so interesting because the word subtlety came to me just moments before you said it, and the fact that you also beautifully told the boiling frog analogy. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about it so delightfully. Yeah, I just love the way the threads are weaving through this conversation. There was a couple of things that came to mind as you were talking, and one of them being, as you were talking, like these places that we're not attuned, we're not in our body, we're not attuned to what's happening. Those places we're still abandoning ourselves do seem to grow kind of ever more subtle. And it feels to me there's probably still a lifetime worth of discovery there, but it always surprises me when I notice like, oh wow, there's a place. I had one happen very recently that I I was talking to my therapist about, it was over the Christmas period. We had a lot of people staying and kind of meeting extended family. And I was saying to him, oh, it just really, being autistic, I don't find small talk very easy. And I've just been sort of noticing that. And then it wasn't until he kind of invited me into almost this sense of not full, I guess you could say, like presence and responsibility to my own experience of feeling this sense of like, I ought to make small talk. I'm not going to make small talk. And very subtly kind of abandoning what's actually true for me in those moments where I'm feeling this kind of like, there's a desire for small talk. I'm here just thinking, I don't even know how to make it. And so that was a really recent example. It's quite subtle. And it was like, oh, wow. Yes, I can really see that there. Interestingly, the other thought that came to mind was also related to my therapist. I had a session with him earlier. And at the end, we were talking about him saying, I think it'd be a good idea to extend our sessions because we end up kind of going so deep. It's kind of like just at the end of the hour, there's like, oh, hang on, we've still got a way to kind of resurface. And the reason he gave for this, he's saying with some people they have such a capacity to like be with themselves, it allows us to go deeper. And it's so interesting, like especially related to this conversation, he literally said that today. And I was like, it's so interesting that that's how he's named it, like his recognition that I can be with myself allows us to go deep, which is sort of obvious at one level, but just the like simplicity of how he named it, I was like, oh, I really love that. It felt really pertinent to what you were saying then. It really is, isn't it, like um a journey of learning to be with ourselves.
Yes. Yes, of learning to be with ourselves. And this is where it all circles around of learning to be with ourselves at higher degrees of sensation,
Mm,
right?
mm,
I'm having this conversation about, the high stakes, high sensation containers, not because I'm averse to sensation. I actually love sensation. And I associate, like, for people who might be like, oh, what do you mean higher levels of sensation? I mean, be with higher levels of energy in the body, be with higher levels of emotional charge in the body, be with higher levels of pleasure in the body, be with higher levels of power in the body, right? And that the more we can expand our capacity to be with this sensation in the body, one, it means we're wielding more energy, where we have more spiritual energy moving through our body, creative energy, and we can bring more intentionality into what we do with that energy and what we create.
mm,
And that's, in my opinion, a desirable thing. Like, who who on the spiritual path wouldn't want to have greater access to receiving more pleasure, being able to hold more energy, being able to navigate conflict more effectively, be able to receive more attention upon them, especially as, for example, I work with a lot of leaders and facilitators who are facilitating in group spaces and expanding our capacity to
mm,
be with not just the sensation moving through our body, but also everything that's moving through everyone in the space, because ultimately our nervous system needs to be able to regulate it, because
mm,
we are in many ways the determining factor of how safe the space is, based upon the way
mm,
we are able to be in consciousness and approval of everything that's arising. Um, and this is, again, I'll relate it to sexuality. It's like We all want the climax. We all want the orgasm. But there's this way that we can get so hungry for the power, that peak experience, that we actually become disconnected from like the subtlety of every step that leads up to that moment. One, in a way that can make us like a dry sponge trying to fully fill and hydrate ourselves all at once, which we know that doesn't work. And two, it's like when we're rushing towards that peak, think about in the context of a sexual experience. If we're rushing towards that climax, but we're disconnected from the subtlety of ourself and the relationship to the other person, that's a recipe for some messiness and potentially some harmful interaction, right? So like you sharing that story about what your therapist said to you around like, well, you know, it's cool that you don't like small talk, but notice if there's actually like some type of pressure or frustration that you're bringing into the situation that doesn't even need to be there. Because when we really boil down to it on a very subtle level, um, it's actually a form of violence against the self.
Mm,
And to me, on the spiritual path, more than anything, I feel like the spiritual path is about being in service to like reconnection to the whole, and dismantling the need for violence and the need for domination as a form of power, because we've become so disconnected that we don't realize that we're doing it to ourselves.
mm,
So when we really start slowing down and just looking at the subtlety of life as a spiritual practice of like, where is it difficult for me to be fully with myself here, um,
mm,
in this uncomfortable moment? And like the way I describe it in meditation is like, create a fishbowl of that discomfort in your body and then allow yourself to just plop into it and just like steep in it, like be with everything your being wants to resist being with, and let yourself break open into it.
mm,
It's the wildest medicine journey, and all it is intimacy and presence with the self.
mm. Yeah, I love that so much. So, how are we doing for time? Oh, wow, that's flown by. We're almost up on time. So, it feels the place I believe we haven't really gone yet is we've talked about how we can choose into these experiences in a way that is coming from shadow. How would we know if something is actually true for us, if choosing into a particular high sensation experience actually is aligned for us? How would you suggest listeners are able to tune into that?
Yeah. Well, I can share what's true for me and what I tend to recommend, and also really acknowledge that everyone's approach to accessing their authentic intuition is going to be unique, and that
Mm,
everyone needs to ultimately trust their own process and discernment. Um, but I would say, and again, this is something that I learned through being in the transformational coaching industry for 8 or 9 years now, which is a wild place to be.
mm,
And, for example, one of the sales tactics that was often taught early on is you need to make the person decide whether or not they're going to be a yes to the container when they're on the call.
mm,
It's like get the yes or no while they're on the call, because if they're off, like their response would be, they're going to find a reason why it's not for them. You're going to connect them to like their authentic yes. And then if they get off the call, they're going to think of all the reasons why it's actually not right for them. That may be true. And that may also be like selling on a peak, where you've gotten a person into a heightened state where they're not necessarily considering all the other pieces. And that's been a source. Likely, if you're listening to this, you probably are like, oh yeah, that has totally happened to me before. And that was a really upsetting experience. So
yeah.
yeah.
I
So
really, I just want to say, I think that's so beautifully named, because going back to what you're saying, everyone has their own way of being able to hear what's right for them, really hear their intuition. And I'd say for most of us, the kind of experience, that peak experience you're talking about, for most of us isn't the place where we hear our intuition. Is actually the place where, we've got so much excitement, and kind of often going back to what you were saying earlier about the difference between being able to truly trust the facilitator versus pedestalizing them. If this is a peak experience activated by this sense of like, oh wow, the facilitator's amazing, this coach is amazing, likelihood is the direction of attention isn't going to be inwards.
yeah. And it's yeah, that's a good way to say it. That being said, I have had experiences where that has been the real choice, but where I have gotten to with my own work when it comes to selling and offering my services, and how I'll translate this to making choices about high stakes, like high sensation containers, is to give yourself the time after you have the initial conversation with whoever is associated with the experience to like let your nervous system really sit with and be with the decision, where there's no pressure involved, where you're not worried about disappointing anyone, where it's like, when I just sit with me and when I really let myself feel into the energy of this experience, do I feel more opening in my system, or do I feel more of like a contraction? Right? Like it's really inviting a cultivation of our intuition. And one of the spots here is that likely a high sensation experience you might participate in is going to have some level of risk. Otherwise, it wouldn't be high sensation. Maybe it's a relational risk where someone you're in a relationship with, like if you go and have this experience, it could be threatening in some way, or maybe it's a financial risk, or it's some type of thing where there's an unknown involved, where you don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. And I will be the first to raise my hand and say that I have definitely made made decisions in the past to participate in very high sensation experiences where I just kind of where I did just cast, the universe is going to take care of me and it's all going to be fine. And it was fine ultimately. But to me, there's a difference. And again, on an energetic level of casting all the safety to the wind and trusting everything will be fine, versus like, I'm really connected with on a bodily level that there's unknown and that there's risk implied in saying yes to this experience. And I'm willing to accept that I don't know what the outcome's going to be. I'm not going to go in attached to a specific outcome. And regardless of what happens on the other side, I'm deeply committed to holding myself through it and to the best of my ability, take responsibility for what happens. Now, that doesn't mean not letting ourselves feel the grief, like whatever arises, but it means like this feels like a risk that's enough worth it to me that I'm willing to experience uncertainty or loss or radical change on the other side that I trust. Um, so that's those are the main things I would offer.
Really, really beautifully described. And I think there's such a, whether it's about choosing into experiences like this or really anything else in life, I think understanding that way that you can feel a yes or a no to something and feel the fear. And sometimes they like you say, an example of choosing into a high sensation experience, there likely will be fear even if it's a yes. And it can be very easy to mistake the feeling of fear for a no when we haven't attuned to recognizing like they can coexist. The yes and the no can coexist with fear, but that's not the place to know whether it's aligned or not.
Yes. And the one other simple question I would invite asking is, uh, who am I making this decision for?
Mm,
Am I making this decision truly for me, or am I making it to appease someone else, to be seen a certain way? Like really inviting that deeper reflection of, is this for me? And just like, where is this decision coming from and why?
yeah, wonderful. Oh, this has been such a pleasure. Not a high sensation pleasure, but a pleasure nonetheless. I really love the places we journey to with this. So, if listeners are liking this conversation and what you've shared, where can they find out more about you and your gorgeous work?
Yeah, so you can visit www.ariellebrown.com, and there's two main ways you can work with me right now. I do private coaching specifically for conscious entrepreneurs who are really wanting to create their intimate relational life in a way that supports their vision and their purpose. So really having
Mm,
our intimate and our sexual relationships be relationships that really support us bringing our full creativity and purpose into the world, as opposed to kind of being out of alignment with ultimately what we're really valuing and wanting to create. So
beautiful.
for Thank you. So I offer one-on-one coaching for individuals and couples. And then I also have what I would kind of call my modern mystery school. It's an ongoing online membership called the Cosmic Tantra Community. And this is really for spiritual practitioners who are wanting to come into a community of people learning how to be with greater levels of sensation in the body through intimacy, through connection, through games and sharing about who we truly are and what we desire. So those are the two entry points, and I welcome you to reach out and connect.
Wonderful. And I really love the hmm, throughout this conversation, but particularly I really noticed as you were describing the ways to work with you, you've got such a exquisite kind of attention to detail. And I don't mean the detail as such, like almost like just paying attention to whatever is there in the moment. Um, yeah, really beautiful. And this again has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Arielle.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for feeling the meaning of that post and reaching out to connect. It's a total pleasure.
I'm glad I trusted my intuition on that one.
Mhm.
But thank you.